So I'm here with Professor John Loughran, currently the Dean of the Faculty of Education here at Monash, but a science education researcher of some note. So John, welcome, and can you tell us a little bit about your research in science education work that you've done?
Sure. So if I think about it over a career,
Yep.
I started off as a science method lecturer, so I was very interested in how people learn to be a science teacher. So that inevitably took me following student teachers out into school and what it's like to become a beginning teacher. That's all caught up in the science stuff. Eventually that led me then to, is there anything special about being a science teacher? Took me into
Of course.
Yes. So that took me into the realms of pedagogical content knowledge, and I suppose, 15 years of my work has been around PCK, and, how embarrassing to look back on some of the early stuff and think about what I thought I knew about but had no idea of, and so it developed. So yeah, science teaching and learning, and then into the sophisticated business of PCK.
Okay.
That'd be a career.
Yeah, definitely. So ASERA then is probably been part of your academic career. Can you tell us a little bit how it contributed to your work as a science education researcher?
Actually, a huge part of my career. I think about it in sort of three chunks, I think, Deb. First one was as either a doctoral student or beginning lecturer, and being introduced to two things in ASERA. One, the network, so knowing the important names, the big people, you meet your bibliography. That was pretty cool.
Meet your bibliography.
And then the other part of it was beginning to get a feel for how to do research in essence. What does a conference presentation entail? What does it mean to actually really have something to say rather than just a good story?
Yeah.
Good stories are okay,
Good.
but what is an evidence base and what is it that you're actually really researching? So that would be one chunk of it. And then if you think around it middle career, it's how have you been mentored into the system and how do you begin to give back? And then, as sort of things develop from that, I suppose, is the formal side of being a reviewer, being associated with the journal, and trying to actually develop knowledge, new knowledge, across science, education, teaching and learning. So they would be the three sort of chunks, and ASERA was central to all of those. And of course also introduces you to the international networks.
Yeah.
So big deal for me.
So ASERA is a little bit different in format to some of the international conferences that you find yourself.
Indeed.
So how do you compare those different formats?
Yeah, you need a little bit of everything, and what ASERA offers, I think, is a much more collegial and close-knit environment, which gives you an opportunity to play with ideas, learn from others, and actually experiment and take a few risks that maybe you don't do in some of the more formal, or not formal's not right, in some of the more traditional bases. I'm thinking of NAST.
Yes, I called it formulaic.
Yeah. I mean, not that you can't take risks, but
Yeah.
I think ASERA encourages it. And ESERA, which different again, I think is more about accessing the European science education world. So there's ESERA in their work, Europeanish, NAST, heavily American,
Yes.
and then there's ASERA, and I think it just carries that Australian or Australasian sense of a fair go. So a
Yes.
fair go with your research, a fair go with mentoring, a fair go with being networked, an opportunity to build a career and be able to question, push ideas back and forward in a relatively safe environment.
Okay, so ASERA is sort of, it's Australasian, particularly Australian, New Zealand, but it's also Asian facing, Pacific facing. So where do you think it might go in the future? Does it have a role, I suppose, in the regions that it faces?
Yeah, if you think about the Australian-New Zealand thing, sort of similar ideas pervade the work because we've been so close for so long. If you move up into the Asian context, then there's a different attitude to science teaching and learning, different structure of schooling, but hopefully similar expectations. So I think the intermix of the research across those regions is actually really important, particularly in this environment now with TIMSS and PISA.
Yeah.
Having the outcomes that they have doesn't necessarily mean that the science education is better, and yet some of the results would suggest or are interpreted as though they were. So I think playing with the different research environments around the nature of the science teaching and learning can only benefit us.
Right.
You
Yep.
know, it can only benefit
Yeah.
us.
So, you know, John, you've still got PhD students,
Mm-hmm.
you've certainly got a lot of staff. So what would be your advice to PhD students and staff about why they should be part, if at all, of ASERA?
Well, I think it just goes back, your own experience sort of shapes what you think others might learn from or appreciate. And so those things I said at the start apply for doctoral students the same as staff. As your career develops, there are times when ASERA is giving to you, and then there are times when you should be giving back. And so I think ASERA is really important in that sense of a community, an Australasian, Asian community of science teaching and learning. You should try and get in on the ground floor, and you should try and learn and be networked and be associated with the people and the ideas, and you should also be prepared to give back and contribute and help others. It's a big mentoring world.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
ASERA lives in that mentoring world, takes it seriously, and I think that's really important. We're products of it.
We are products of it, yes.
It's a good thing.
So John, where do you think ASERA should head in the future?
I think we need to get involved much more in the political debates and shape policy. We have a lot to offer. We're not necessarily the first port of call for advice. So I think if we were to be thinking about ourselves as more of a peak body, I think the knowledge, skills and ability that we've got, the research expertise that exists, I think we ought to get into challenging the formulaic approach to policy development, or the always looking outside for something. We've got a lot to offer from inside. I think we need to get a little bit more active in doing that. He says, having never been able to do it himself.
Great. So John, thanks very much for your time this morning. So I know we're both products of ASERA and we're probably a bit biased about the views, but I appreciate the time and hopefully continued support of ASERA moving forward.
Yeah, my argument would be, Deb, ASERA gave us opportunities that we wouldn't have had we not been there. And we are products of it and very grateful for it.
Great. Thanks, John.